Hello, hi and welcome to Galactic Collaboration Summit. This is Wictor Wilén calling in from Stockholm, from my home office. Super excited to be here with you all today to present some really nice features that has come to Teams over the Microsoft Teams over the last few weeks and months. What we're going to talk about is how to create seamless and secure experience with Microsoft Teams SSO Tabs. SSO Tabs is a way for you to create a seamless single sign-on experience for your end users in your tabs, whether they are on web, mobile or desktop. My name is Wictor Wilén, based out of Stockholm in Sweden. I work as Global Innovation Lead for Modern Workplace at Avanade. I've been a SharePoint MVP for 10 years, hopefully 11 this summer, and we'll see. No, who knows? Or actually, I know by the time this episode is broadcasted, most likely. I'm also a SharePoint MCA and MCM and MCSM, all those acronyms we all love. And also, due to the work or thanks to the work, depending on how you see it, member of the Microsoft PMP core team, where I'm responsible for the Microsoft Teams app generator, Joe Teams. You can find my latest thinkings on www.victorwilén.se and find me on Twitter at Victor. And also, if you have some lengthy post that can't fit into Twitter, 140 characters, then feel free to email me. I don't guarantee that I'll reply directly, but I do the best I can. So today we are going to talk about SSO tabs or single sign-on tabs in Microsoft Teams. So first of all, we're going to take a look at what they are and how they work and what's the caveats and how to, sort of the inner thinkings of them. And then we essentially will spend most of the time in demos and code and actually see how we can set an SSO tab up. First of all, what kind of configuration do we need to do in Azure AD? Second of all, we're going to scaffold out a new project and using the Joe Teams Yeoman generator for Microsoft Teams apps, which does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So essentially it's the next finish kind of approach, and you will be having a signed in user in your tab. And we're going to take a look at that code is being generated and how you can modify that, etc. And finally, we're going to talk about one of the things you need to think about if you want to use this single sign-on feature and the identity token given to the user and call into services such as Microsoft Graph. Let's start this journey on SSO tabs by first take a look at some of the features of an SSO tab, then some of the caveats, and finally we take a look at the flow between your tab, which is an iframe, to the Microsoft Teams application, to Azure AD, and then back to your tab. So Microsoft Teams tabs are supported from JavaScript SDK version 1.5 and also Manifest 1.5. So if you have an old application, you need to upgrade those and ensure that you have those latest versions. Latest version is actually 1.6, but 1.5 is good enough for this. However, the specific tabs SSO feature is in developer preview only. So you need to think about that when you're building an application. And the idea with an SSO tab is that you don't have to worry about the sign-in flow or the authentication flow here. Microsoft Teams will help you to sign in the user with the information it already have, since the user is already signed into the application itself. And then together with your registration, you will get back an identity token. And this is a feature that works across the desktop application, the web application, and the mobile application. And once you consent to your application in one of these apps, it will work across both desktop, web, and mobile. And the whole idea is that it's an identity verification only. So this is not something you use to authorize user to talk to Microsoft Graph, etc. It verifies that the user is who he or she says he or she is. There's a couple of things you need to think about though when building SSO tabs. And first of all, it's about the domain. The domain you want to host your tab on must be registered together with or in the Azure AD application that you create. And you also need to host your tab on that domain. And third about the domain is that your domain must also be registered in your manifest. So if you have a domain, you need to specify it in the manifest, in the Azure AD application, and your app tab or app has to be hosted on that domain. You cannot have multiple domains, so you cannot have a tab that spans across multiple domains or do redirects or jumps between back and forth domains, because then you will not be signed in those other domains. And also, one very important thing here is that you, if you have multiple tabs, for instance, they all have to be hosted on the same domain. So it's only one domain per Teams application. And one very important thing is, and I guess many of you are already using Azure websites when setting up a site and spinning up, and because it's easy to do, you get SSL support and all those kind of things. But unfortunately, there are so many people doing this. So the Azure AD team actually considers Azure applications hosted on Azure websites as insecure. So you need to purchase your own domain, register your own domain, and get a SSL certificate for that one. Of course, use Azure for that, because then it's that whole experience is super seamless. Finally, once again, it's worth iterating that the token you receive from the Teams client is an identity token only. So let's take a look at the flow, how it works when you in your application asks as a Teams application to get the token for the currently signed in users. And you start with your tab, which is an iframe, as I mentioned, hosted on a domain somewhere. And through the JavaScript, you run the get auth token method, and that will talk back to the Teams application. The Teams application will then see if you have consented or this application is consented for. If it's not, you might get a consent information dialog that you need to do. And this is a one-time only, as I said. Once that is done, essentially the Teams client will talk to Azure AD with the right information that you provided in the Teams tab manifest. And then you will get, the Teams client will get an identity token back. And finally, the Teams client will send that token back to your tab, and you will get a JavaScript callback with that token, and you can then use it and ensure that the user is signed in into your Teams tab with an identity token. So let's get out of PowerPoint mode and into some actual stuff, and let's go into the Azure portal to start with, to register your application in the correct way. There's a couple of important steps, and of course a set of grids that you need to remember to get this up and running. So let's switch over to the Azure portal. Here we are in the Azure AD portal. I need to go into my Azure AD and to app registrations to create my app. And of course you need permissions to do this, but if you don't have permissions, then you need to give detailed instructions to your admins, whoever does that for you. So you click on new registration, give your application a name, Galactic SSO Tab. I choose to use account in an organizational directory here, then I click on register, and that should be it to register your application. And the first thing you will need to do is, once the application is created, is to save the application ID of your application, which you will find up here. So you take this one and click here to copy to keyboard, and then I use sticky notes to save this one down here, because we will use that later. You can also see I took a note here of my domain that I will use. I'm using ngrock.io to tunnel it back to my local machine. So if you have a production and staging environment, etc., and remember what I said about multiple domains earlier, you need to set up a manifest and an application per environment. That is super important because it's per domain, and we'll use this domain very shortly. The first thing I need to go in is to do expose an API. So I click here on expose an API, and the first thing here on this page, we'll go through all three of them, is to set the application ID URI. And the first time I go in here, it will actually automatically generate this one for me with API:/ and then my application ID. But for Teams tabs, we actually need to insert our domain in here as well. So go over to sticky notes, copy paste the domain part, skip the protocol part. So paste it in here. So API:/, then my domain name, and another slash, and then the application ID. This is something we need to save as well. So I paste that to the, copy that to the clipboard and paste it to my sticky note. I will need that when I generate my app later, like that. And now we have this one. And as I said, here you have the domain registration, the important thing that I mentioned previously. The second thing is to add a scope. we need to give the scope a name and some descriptions, and we should call it access as user. I need to ensure that admins and user can consent to this, and then I need to choose display names and description for both admins and users, and we just type access as user here, and I copy paste that into all of them. And you should of course describe your application as good as you can in here, so the admin knows what they are consenting to. So access user SSO Galactic SSO Tab or something like that. Make sure it's enabled and click add scope. The third step on this page is to add client applications, and the reason we do that is that your tab lives inside the Teams application, the mobile, desktop or web, and those are applications. So what you're doing is you're giving your tab and sending information to the parent client, which is the Teams client, and the Teams client is on behalf of your using getting that identity token. We need to set up that connection by adding a client application here. And I had those IDs for the applications on my sticky notes. So the first one is for the Teams mobile desktop. These GUIDs, it's good to remember them of course, but you can always copy paste them from the developer documentation for tabs that I will link to in the end of the session. Then I need to connect this, allow these applications to use this scope here. And I click add application. And this was for the Teams mobile and desktop applications. I need to do the same for web, which is actually in the Teams world considered as a separate application. So I copy paste that GUID here as well in here and choose authorize scopes and click add application. With that, I set up the connection between the app ID URI, created scope, and those client applications. Next, we go to API permissions, since we want to give this application permissions, of course, to read information. And in here, even if you give it calendar read or calendar group read write all or anything like that, the token you get will not have access to that. As I mentioned, and I'm iterating again, it's an identity only token. So I click on add permission, and there's a couple of permissions I need to add here, and I choose Microsoft Graph. And then I choose to do delegated permissions. And we already had user opt read, that's one of the requirements for these Teams tabs, but we also need to add email, we need to add offline access, we need to add open ID, and we need to have profile. So we need to give those permissions to this application, and I click add permissions. And that's essentially what I need to do the configuration. And you can see none of these requires admin consent, so the application can be consented by the user. The next step on our journey is to create the Teams application. Now finally we can start fiddling with some code and get back to the real action. And we do that using the Yeoman's Teams generator because it has support for all of this by default, and we'll scaffold out the project which does everything on this for you. So I go over to command prompt. I have a directory here that I created. I also already installed the Yeoman generator by running npm install generator-teams --global, so it's installed. So I type yo teams, and the generator will start and will ask me a set of questions. And throughout these questions, we will actually use the application ID and app ID URI that we provided, that we created or got from our Azure AD app. So the first thing asked for is the solution name. We choose Galactic, the default one. I want to use the current folder. We give it a nicer Galactic SSO Tab name for the project. The company, Wictor. I can choose with the manifest version I want to use. As I said, at least 1.5. Let's choose the latest GA, which is 1.6. Can skip that one, but then I need to choose what I want to add here. In this case, we only want to add a tab, an SSO tab, so we're just choosing that one. Next step is that we will tell the system where we want to host our application. By default, you see it says azurewebsites.net here, which is the default setting. For SSO tabs, that does not work, and I'm also going to use ngrok here. So let's copy paste our URL that we got here, like that, without opening it, and then we go back here and paste it in. So that's the one I want to use. Do I want to show a loading indicator when your app tab loads? I will not do this for this demo, and I will talk about that, why we're not doing this. You can do whatever, but for this demo it makes more sense to show that that we don't get the loading indicator. But the loading indicator can be good to use because there's a slight delay when you're doing that authorization, beginning of 1 or 2 seconds. And with the loading indicator means that we can get a nice spinner, a native spinner in Microsoft Teams to do while you're doing that authorization dance and talk to Azure AD and before you got your identity token. We chose no here just for demo sake. I don't want to have any test framework. We skipped App Insights as well. I need to give it a name, call it Galactic only. What kind of tab? Let's create a configurable tab, and that is a tab that lives in a Microsoft Teams team compared to personal, which is just for you as an individual. I want this to be available in Teams. And finally, do you require Azure AD single sign-on support for this tab? And I choose yes here. So this is where the magic happens when it scaffolds out the project. Click enter. So I need to copy paste the application ID in here. Just for your reference, so this is not hard-coded anywhere. This is stored in an environment file. So if you choose to scaffold out your application before you have your Azure AD registration, you can do that, and then just insert your app ID and app ID URI into the application afterwards. Let's go back to the sticky, get our application ID, get that to the clipboard, paste it in, click enter. And we need the app ID URI, and the reason Teams need this is that it's actually using that for in the manifest. And as you can see, since you already entered in here the URL and the app ID, we can anticipate what app ID URI should be. And if it's not that one, yeah, there's something wrong. Let's click here. Do you want this tab to be available in SharePoint Online? We skip that one. And from that on, we will start scaffolding out our project. So you will see there's a set of files being generated. And once those files are here, and then we start the npm install process. And since this is a recording, you don't have to watch the long-running npm install. So we fast forward here a bit. So our application is now scaffolded. Took a couple of minutes. I could actually go out and get a cup of coffee, but our application is now up and scaffolded. It's not up and running really yet, so we can see all the files, etc., created here. So I can start up Visual Studio Code and open up the application and move the window over to this screen, and you can see here are my full application. What I need to do now, first of all, we can take a look at the .env file, and here you can actually see we have all the information about our application. So in the bottom here we have the app IDs and app ID URIs. So if you want to replace them or update them, or if you have multiple environments, these are the files you actually modify. And as I said, I'm going to use ngrok as well. So I copy paste in my ngrok information in here, since I will use that to run the application. That is something that's personal to you, so you should of course not share that. But this one is running on the Galactic SSO Tab subdomain. So once I've saved that file, all that is left is to start the application and see if it works. So what I do is I go back to the command line, and then I type gulp ngrok serve, and that will actually start up everything. Will compile, build your files, the Teams package for you, compile everything, and also set up the ngrok tunneling. So we do that, and while we do that, we can go over to Microsoft Teams. So let's start up Microsoft Teams by going to teamsmicrosoft.com, and in here I already created a team that we will actually sideload our application into. And to sideload an application, of course, you need the permissions and those kind of things. I hover over the icon here, click on apps, and in the lower right hand corner we will see upload a custom app. And in the dialog, I will then go to my code repository. I will go to demos, Galactic package where our manifest is, and then the galactic.zip file that's generated by the gulp command that we issued in the command line just a minute ago. Click on open. And you will see here the description. This is from your manifest. Of course, you should update that. We have a tab, and then we click on add. So now we added up application here. It's a custom app. It's side-loaded. It's just for this team only. Click on my general channel. Go to add a tab, and then I'll find my Galactic SSO tab. Click on that one. And I'll get the default configuration here, which doesn't do anything. So we can just say hello Galaxy and click save. And once we saved here, we will actually load into our application. And as you can see now, it says hello undefined, and then it said hello Victor. So it said that immediately, fairly fast. And the reason we saw the hello undefined, that was because we were asking for the identity token, and then we use the information in the identity token to get my name. And this is where you also could use a spinner, so to say, so you get the better experience here and do all your stuff you need to do in your application before you actually show the UI of it. So those who paid real attention, so I did not get the consent dialog here. That is something, since it's in developer preview, that is something the Teams team likely sorted out. I've seen it previously, but for the last few days I haven't seen it, but the official documentation says you will see a consent dialog there. But I'm happy as long as I don't see it. So, as you can see, we got everything up and running here without writing a single line of code, and let's see how that actually works and what's being scaffolded out for you, for us to help. But you remember I did the choice there to choose to scaffold a single sign-on tab, and there is a built-in template in the Teams generator that actually set this up for you and shows you your display name. So let's jump on over to Visual Studio Code and take a look at what's actually happening behind the scenes. First of all, in our manifest, what's being generated there at the bottom of this manifest is something called the web application info. And during compile time, when we're running the gulp task, when we're packaging the manifest, it will replace ID with your app ID that you have in .env file, and the resource with app ID URI. So this is the app ID and app ID URI. You cannot specify any scopes or anything in here, but that's what you do. And this is the magic. And this is also where it says, you can see you can only have one app and one domain per manifest. So that's the magic behind all of that. But then if we dig into the actual JavaScript code that's happening. So if I go into my scripts here and take a look at my tab, my first one here, which is the actual tab that shows the hello Wictor Wilén in this case. So if I scroll down here, we have the initialize function, and that's what initializes in the Microsoft Teams JavaScript SDK. We run some things, we're getting the current context, just to set that, we update the theme, but then we run Microsoft Teams.authentication get auth token. And this is what's initializing the conversation between your tab and the Teams client, the mobile web or desktop. And then you have two methods there, success callback and failure callback. The first one is when you have a successful token and everything worked, as we could see it did in the demo here. Then we get a token back. We actually get can decode that. I installed the JWT, the JOT npm package, so I can decode that. And from that decoded JOT token, I can get the name of the user. So I set that as state, and that's why we could see it could say hello and then the user's name. Then finally, I use Microsoft Teams.app initialization .notify success to tell the Teams client, hey, I'm ready, the success worked fine, we're all done here. And this is also what's if you have the app spinner, for instance, the loading spinner, that's what telling the Teams client to hide that spinner, and the user will not see that kind of loading sequence, or it will actually see the native spinner in Microsoft Teams. In case we do have any issues, we will get into the failure callback. Then I can set the error message, and then I notify failure here as well. Finally, we have the resources specified in here. Since I'm using TypeScript, I'm actually enforced to specify resources. There's nothing in the documentation that says what it's doing, but using the app ID URI in here works perfectly fine. So finally, just down in the code here, as you can see, this is where I output the name of the user. So that's essentially what you have to do. So this is fairly, even though this is a React app, you can add this little code snippet to any kind of application or tab that you're building, and as long as you have that Azure AD registration. Now that we have this identity token, we want to call into other APIs, such as Microsoft Graph. And to do that, we need to do a token exchange. We need to change the identity token to an access token. And that's used in Azure AD through the OAuth on behalf of flow, which works like this. First of all, you need to have your everything set up. You need to modify your Azure AD application a little bit. You need to ensure to have a secret from that one. You need to do an admin consent on that one as well. But it works like this. You have an API that you call into, in this case /API/photo, and that is ensuring that it's a valid identity token that I send to it. So from my Teams app, I send an identity token to my application, verify that one. If it's not verified, I send an access denied. Then I call into Azure AD, using the on behalf of flow, specify send my identity token with the set of scopes that I want to have access to. And if everything is successful, I will get an access token back from Azure AD. I can then take this access token and pass into Microsoft Graph in this case, if that was the scope and resource I requested. And if everything works okay there, I will then get the result back, in this case a photo, the photo of the user. And then I pass that photo back to the tab. This way, we keep everything secure. The only thing we're sending from the client to the server is the identity token. All access tokens and everything is handled server side. And if we jump over to Microsoft Teams and take a look at our application, which I slightly modified now, so you can see how it looks like when we actually do this on behalf of flow and retrieves the picture of the user. So now if we hit reload here, we will reload the frame, and it will take a second or two for it to get up and running, and you will see we actually get the user photo here of the user. And that is done through using the identity token, exchanging that for bearer token server side, then calling into Microsoft Graph, and then returning that binary. So this is a great way for you to work server side and instead of just doing client side code, and specifically when it says this seamless, as you could see. So that's it. Let's wrap this up. First of all, we went through the overall setup and caveats and things you need to think about when creating a Teams Tab SSO implementation. We then demoed it and walked through how to do that, and both in Azure AD, but also scaffolding your application, how the application works. Then we did a quick overview of the on behalf of flow, and that you can actually get that one to work as well if you want to use the identified user in the tab and call into services such as Microsoft Graph. You have all the details about the first part and the thing with demos in the official Teams SSO documentation. There is a demo in there. It's a fairly complex demo that you need to do a lot of investigation to understand how it actually works. So I have this demo that we saw today, including the on behalf of flow, is available on my site on GitHub, so you can download it there. It's a little bit easier to get started with. I also written a blog post on all the steps you need to do the Tabs SSO, which you can find here as well. And I use the Yo Teams generator to scaffold my projects. If you want this seamless experience, scaffolding projects with SSO, just as seamless as the single sign-on features in Teams are, then go ahead and use that one. So with that, thank you everyone for chiming in. I know it's rough times for many of us, and I can't wait to see you out there and meet you at a conference soon, or in the future at least. Meanwhile, if there's anything, reach me on Twitter or on my website or email me. Have an amazing Galactic Collaboration Summit.
Thank you for being a part of the Galactic Collaboration Summit. Join the community and meet in-person world-class Microsoft and MVP speakers this autumn in Wiesbaden, Frankfurt, Germany, with 15 full-day tutorials and over 150 Microsoft 365 and Azure sessions at the combined European Collaboration Summit and European Cloud Summit from 26 to 28 October 2020. Community rocks.